All right, here again, camera womanless for another edition of Paleo Eats. What I'm working on today is actually a Texas-style or beanless chili. So what I've got in front of me here is some stew meat that I picked up at the farmer's market. This happens to be grass-fed longhorn that I picked up from a farm here in Arizona. I picked it up at the farmer's market, but they're actually out of Eloy, Arizona. And it's a grass-fed longhorn. And it's really good stuff. They make some great products. They have both this and goat, and I've gotten some occasional pigs right after pork rather after 4-H time. Got a little ham, which was excellent. So here's the meat as it comes, and this is just stew beef. It tends to be some pretty lean cuts, tougher cuts. What I'm doing is I'm actually cutting it up into more bite-sized pieces. So, down into a 1-inch cube size, something like this, actually probably less than 1 inch. That way, in the chili itself, it's, bite-sized. You're not trying to tear stuff apart. For a moment, I want to kind of talk about why grass-fed beef. I think I've mentioned it before. Well, first of all, cows are, they are evolved to eat grass. As strange as that may sound to some people. And what a lot of people don't realize is the standard beef you get from the farmer's, not farmer's market, but the regular supermarket beef, certainly the very inexpensive supermarket beef, is produced in things they called CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations. And those confined animal feeding operations produce beef that is grass-fed at a young age, as pretty much all cows are. They are then brought into these large feed lots where the animals unfortunately stand up to their knees in their own waist in a lot of cases, and are fed a mixture of usually primarily corn and sometimes soy, as well as hormones, vitamin supplements, and other things like that. The nasty side effect of this, there's numerous nasty side effects. From just a public safety and public health standpoint, these are dangerous because corn creates an acidic environment in the rumen of cattle. And I should point out, corn is a grass seed. It is not grass. So what you have is this acidic environment, and certain acid-resistant E. coli bacteria can basically flourish in the stomach, and as a result of that, they make their way through the digestive tract of the animal and out the backside. Because these animals are in contact with their own excrement, they are therefore then they have this bacteria on their exteriors. When they are slaughtered, that bacteria becomes, unfortunately, part of the final delivered product. Grass-fed cattle do not have an acidic rumen. As a result of that, they do not breed acid-resistant E. coli. That's not to say you can't get anything, they're perfectly safe and you can eat the stuff raw. That's not necessarily the case. However, they do not have these very nasty acid-resistant E. coli. And the reason those are particularly bad is because the human stomach is very acidic. Therefore, if you have typical E. coli and other typical bacteria, they do not survive the human stomach, and therefore they put you at a much lower risk of any kind of infection. Acid-resistant E. coli, however, can pass through the stomach and make it into the lower digestive tract, and as a result causing E. coli infections. So that's one of the many reasons that grass-fed beef is the way to go. In addition to that, the omega-6 fatty acid, which is a polyunsaturated fatty acid content of grass-fed cattle, is much lower and much higher in omega-3 content, and this has to do purely with the fact that they're eating grass, which has a much closer 1-to-1 ratio of those two fatty acids. Grain, on the other hand, whether it's corn, which is commonly used, or other grains, tends to be very high in omega-6 fatty acids. So you end up with meat that is therefore higher in omega-6 fatty acids. This is generally, as I think even the common medical establishment has decided, or has started to come around on, high or low omega-3 is not good, and that's why they're pushing omega-3 supplementation. Eat fatty fish and all of that stuff. This is only a problem on the backdrop, low omega-3 that is, with high omega-6. The absolute values, you want enough of both, but you really want about the same amount of both, and that actually turns out to be the more critical of the features. So high omega-6 is bad, but specifically in the absence of omega-3. Now, it's been suggested that people can take fish oil because of its high omega-3 content, to balance out basically eating high omega-6 foods. This may work to some degree for a period of time, but in the long run, it's not exactly, it's kind of a losing proposition. So the way you want to go is to eating grass-fed, and the more general term is pastured meats. So when you're talking about any animal that's a ruminant, something that has a rumen, like a cow that chews its cud, you want grass-fed animals. And one thing to be clear about is grass-fed is not necessarily grass-fed and finished. There are a number of producers who grass-feed their animals up until the last couple of months, and then grain finish them because it does change the flavor, it does change the fat contents in that critical and kind of detrimental way. So grass-fed and grass-finished are both important features. And basically, when you go to your local farmers market and hopefully are able to find this stuff, or you get stuff commercial, either in the grocery store or even mail order, make sure that it's grass-fed and finished. Otherwise, you're really not getting the full benefit. So I'm going to continue to cut this up into bite-sized pieces, and so basically I'm just taking these. This is the way I got it from the farmers market. I'm going to cut it up into smaller pieces, and then we'll come back and start the next step. All right. So here in front of me, I've got now my nice small diced pieces of stew meat and the spices I'm going to use. So I'll kind of go through these and explain somewhat why I'm using them, and also talk a little bit about spices in general. To make the general note, these two spices I've ground up fresh. This is fresh ground cumin, and this is fresh ground black pepper. You can buy cumin seeds and black peppercorns just about anywhere. They're relatively inexpensive for the volume you get, and then also when you fresh grind them, you get a lot more flavor out of them. The smells from this are quite potent, and so it makes a much bigger bang in your chili if you use these. Now I'll talk about cumin. If you haven't used cumin before, it's a pretty smoky flavor. I really like it. I think it goes well with chilies and things like that. Some people don't like the smoke flavor. My wife, for instance, not such a big fan. In addition to the black pepper and the cumin, I've also got some just kosher salt. Smoked paprika, again, if you don't like smoked paprika, there are sweet paprikas you can go with that are not quite as smoky. Dark chili powder, and I'm not even really sure how well that shows up, it's so dark, but that's those two. I wish I could get, there are recipes out there on the internet if you want to make your own chili powder or paprika. They're both ground chili peppers of various types. The smoked paprika is the chili is dried by smoking before it's ground. That's where you get your smoky flavor. And then garlic powder, and that's not a garlic salt. That's just a garlic powder. Again, I think I've spoken about this before. I use garlic powder just because it's extremely convenient. If you're a fresh garlic is probably going to give you a little bit more oomph, and it's going to give you a little bit cleaner flavor. But it's a little bit of a pain in my view to deal with. I do it sometimes, but not all the time. So what I wanted to point out here is I've got a coffee grinder. I use this solely for spices. You do not want to use this for coffee after you use it for spices, because your coffee will not taste the same. So I use that to grind the cumin and the black pepper. You could, for large quantities like this, I'll use the grinder. Obviously, you could use just a regular pepper grinder, but it's going to take you all day to get a real fine ground pepper, at least in that kind of quantity. So basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw the meat into a skillet, a nice tall-sided skillet, because this is going to be skillet's probably not the right word, but a large saucepan maybe. You want something that's probably at least 9 or 10 inches in diameter and got sides that are 4 or 5 inches tall. So because what's going to happen is we're going to sear that meat, and then we're in coconut oil. I'm specifically going with coconut oil right now because it just so happens that I'm going to kind of doing a dairy-free thing at the moment. However, clarified grass-fed butter, and again, the grass-fed butter is an important part, not just any kind of butter. Kerrygold, you can find that in a lot of places, sometimes Costco included. Trader Joe's is a place you can find it. It is grass-fed. There are other sources for grass-fed butter, but again, same reason we talked about the grass-fed beef before. Grass-fed dairy is important. So you can do that if you like that and you don't have any dairy issues, things like that. I'm going to go with coconut oil just because I like it. It's real. It's got a real clean flavor, very heat tolerant. So what I'll do is I'll get my skillet nice and hot, and then I'm going to sear. I'm going to sear all the sides of this, and then I'm going to add in all my spices. And basically, we're going to this will not be cooked. It'll just start to brown on the outside. We'll throw in the seasonings, and then after that, we'll be adding in some tomato, and we'll be making a sauce out of that. So the next step, we're just going to sear this up, add in our spices, and we'll work from there. Alrighty, so we've got our pan here. I think sometimes this might be called something like a Dutch oven or something like that. Goes under different names, but this is what I've got. Kind of again, flat bottom, tall sides, and a lid's important because you're gonna want to have that lid for later. So I've got my meat all chopped up here, and I've got coconut oil that's real hot. And one of the ways you can kind of tell that you've got the right temperature is you'll actually see a shimmer in the oil. It's hard to describe exactly what I mean, but you'll hopefully know it when you see it. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop this in, and then basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let it sit temporarily, but I've got so much here that I don't have to stir it through to make sure all of it's hitting the bottom and getting full heat and getting a good brown on it. So we're going to go with that. All right, so we got everything kind of browned. You'll notice we've got a lot of water that's come out of the meat. This is pretty typical, but we want to cook that uncovered because we actually do want to kind of bring that down a little bit, reduce it. But I don't know, hopefully you can see that there's a whole lot of liquid. While we've still got that liquid here, what I want to do is get the spices in and kind of make almost a pan sauce out of those juices that have come out of the meat. So we'll just kind of sprinkle all this stuff in. So be somewhat careful about getting it sort of mixed about. We don't want any big clumps of stuff in any one particular spot. I'll go ahead and turn that down some. So that's the pepper going in. We've got the cumin also going in here now. My smoked paprika. You'll smell these as they go in. They're very, very aromatic, and it's going to bring a lot of flavor. So this is the nice dark chili powder. This is not a particularly hot chili powder. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, not a sweet chili powder. All right, we got garlic powder going down, and I'm going to put the salt in here last. I'm pretty heavy-handed with this. One of the reasons is it seems like a lot for the quantity of meat, but we're going to be adding some liquid here in a little bit that's going to basically dilute that down quite a bit. But I want to kind of get this flavor started in here now. So we're going to go ahead, now that I got that all stirred about, we're going to go ahead, sorry, that's noisy. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to turn this down to a pretty low. I have 2 out of 10 on mine here, and kind of let this simmer a little bit. You don't want to go in too crazy, but we're going to go ahead and cover that up, and that's going to kind of let the flavor infuse into the meat. And we're going to start kind of the next phase to this.